All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 459 of the Restoring Rapport podcast. This is a podcast for young believers who are pursuing the goal of marriage and family, trying to get married as young as possible in a healthy way, according to God's design. My name is Seth Hensley. I come on the show twice a week, every week on Thursday and Sunday, and try to equip and encourage you in your pursuit of the goal of a healthy marriage and family. And today we're going to be reviewing a PDF, actually, called How the Church Can Address the Marriage and Family Crisis 10 Key Takeaways from Communio's nationwide study on faith and relationships, which is a study that I have reviewed elsewhere on the show. So if you're interested, you can go back and search that study. Just type in Communio to the Restoring Rapport search page, whether you're on YouTube or just type YouTube, or just type this Communio, Seth Hensley, Restoring Rapport, and it'll pop up. And you can listen to that episode there. But today we're going to be talking about their 10 key takeaways from this nationwide study that I reviewed elsewhere. So J.D. DeGance is the founder of Communio. He's done a lot of work in the Christian marriage space, just helping couples lower divorce rates, understand the importance of getting married, understanding how marriage can change your life for the better, understanding that there needs to be a lot more marriage happening today than there is. We have a very low marriage rate today, a lower marriage rate than we've had in a very long time. Since 1960, I believe. We peaked in 1970. We had a very, very high marriage rate. In fact, I'll go ahead and show you guys some stats on that are available in Brad Wilcox's book actually called Get Married, Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization. And in that book, he talks about the marriage rate is kind of at an all-time low as of 2021, and I'll show you this graphic here that kind of demonstrates that. As you can see in figure 1.4, the U.S. marriage rate is close to an all-time low in 2021. The number of newly married people per 1,000 married Americans ages 15 and up. You see here that in 1960, it was at about 80% of adults were married. Actually, this is people 15 and up, so this is not even adults. They married younger back then. And then it went up to 85.9%, which is the highest marriage rate we've had, at least on this chart, since 1960, and that was in the 1970s. And then from there, it started to go down with the rise of feminism and the invention of the birth control pill and improved contraception and things like this. And it's plummeting all the way into the 2010s and even into the 2020s. Now we're about 30.2% of Americans aged 15 and up are married, so very, very low compared to previous generations. I don't think that's a good thing. I can give you actually different stats than this here, according to the same sociologist and professor of sociology at the University of Virginia who published this book. His name is Brad Wilcox. He put out another claim that 80% of adults ages 18 and up were married. So it's kind of still the same. It's not just that the 15-year-olds were, the reason that this graph was so high or so low. Like most 15-year-olds aren't married today, so you could make the claim that that is what's throwing off this measurement here in the 2020s. But the same statement applies to 18-year-olds. Today, we have about 49% of adults ages 18 and up married. So yes, only 30% of Americans age 15 and up are married today, but only 49, still less than half of adults ages 18 and up are married, compared to 85.9% of 15-year-olds or of Americans age 15 and up in 1970. So that's just a huge drop. We've also pushed marriage about 10 years further into the future than we did in the 1960s. I don't have the chart for this, but the same guy makes it, and he's a credible source. And he makes the claim that the average, actually, this is common knowledge. I don't even need a source for it. If you just Google it, it'll tell you this pretty much. All the people hover around this number. 20 was the average age of first marriage for women in 1960, and 23 was the average age of first marriage for men in 1960. And today, it is about 27 is the national average age of first marriage for women in this country, and 29 to 30 is the average age of first marriage for men in this country. So we have pushed marriage about 7 years further into the future than we did, 80 years ago. Actually, not 80 years ago, more like, let's see here, 70 years ago, going on 80. And so this is just, I don't know. I don't think this is a good thing. I've argued that in other places, so I'm not going to get too much into detail with it today, but I did want to just kind of set the stage for you before we broke down the 10 key takeaways that this ministry thinks the church needs in order to address the marriage and family crisis. If you're not watching on YouTube, I would highly encourage you to go watch on YouTube, as we are producing a lot of visuals, improved visuals compared to our past stuff. So go there and check it out, because you really are missing out on a significant portion of the content that we're producing if you're not using visuals. If you're only listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any podcast platform, you're really missing out a lot there. So go do that. Leave us a written rating and review. Give me a YouTube comment or a podcast comment, any kind of comment, anywhere you see this, social media, even if you're watching through a clip that I put out on Facebook and Instagram. Tell me what your thoughts are on this article, as well as the claims and the arguments that I make in it. I would love to hear you. I would make this conversation a conversation instead of a boring podcast monologue. Would love to hear from you there. So anywhere you can reach out to me, would love to connect with you there. Moving on, let's jump right in. So 10 key takeaways about how the church can address the marriage and family crisis. Let's move on to, if my PDF could work. Claim number 1. Christian decline over the last 40 years in the United States has prompted, I'm reading from the article, by the way. Christian decline over the last 40 years in the United States has prompted numerous explanations advanced by experts, pastors, church leaders, and those in the media, most of which are either wrong or at best incomplete. That is 100% true. There is so much information being pushed about marriage through the church today, it is laughable. Mainly, I think what's happening is you have a pastor who has seen a lot of poor marriages modeled for him, and therefore does not want to encourage most young believers to get married, or at least he doesn't want to encourage young people to get married if he realizes there's a pretty good chance that they could fail if they do it wrong. And so he doesn't want to be in any way responsible for that. So he doesn't condone marriage as a good idea explicitly for the vast majority of young believers from the pulpit, and instead he just kind of leaves marriage up to he would say it's a matter of conscience whether you get married or not. But what that does is that actually forgets that people have their own flawed perceptions and experiences with marriage, and they often make a decision about whether or not to marry from those flawed experiences and perceptions about it. And so you have a lot of people declining marriage because they've had a bad experience with it, not realizing the tremendous benefit that it can be for not only their health, but their decision making, their emotional well-being, the fact that they're less likely to be lonely, they're more likely to experience a healthy sexual life, they're more likely to experience the joys of a great relationship with their kids. Their kids are more likely to have a better life. It's just overwhelming what marriage can do for you. And the church has not done a good enough job presenting that evidence to young people. Instead, we're citing verses like 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul says that he wishes all people that could live single as he did. And we don't quote the other parts of that chapter, where Paul says that because of sexual immorality, each man is to have his own wife and each woman is to have her own husband, and that only those who are not under constraint and have authority over their own will should remain single, and that if you're burning with passion, it is better to marry. We totally leave out those verses, and those are incredibly crucial verses to have, especially when you take them into consideration through the larger context of Scripture versus in Genesis about it not being good that man should be alone. Okay, God himself says that and creates a helpmate suitable for him. And so I just don't think most young people are designed to live without a spouse. Jesus even says later in Matthew that not all men can accept the statement that it's better not to marry, and only those to whom it has been given can accept that statement. And I think what he's saying there is that marriage and singleness are both matters of calling. Okay, you're called to either one or the other. You don't get to choose what your giftings are. All you do is get to choose whether or not you walk in God the way that God's prescribed. That's what you get to choose. Okay, and so if God's purposed you for one thing, you're not going to have good fruit by walking in another. Okay, it's just like Jonah and the whale. You run from the Lord, you rebel against wisdom, and you're going to get some bad fruit. Okay, but if you embrace the way that God has designed you to walk, then you're going to get a lot of good fruit just because you did that. Okay, so let's continue. It says the National Study on Faith and Relationships pinpointed data and statistics contributing to this collapse. The gap in understanding increasingly leads pastors, church leaders, synods, and evangelists to treat the visual symptoms rather than the underlying root causes of why most people no longer attend church. Here are 10 key takeaways that must be acknowledged in order to preserve families, marriages, and individuals within the church. And then he's going to make a claim. I don't know why it's not letting me go down to the next slide there. I'll just have to keep doing this. But key number one. The collapse of resident fathers through the collapse of marriage is at the heart of the unraveling of Christianity. The growth of the religious nuns is unlikely to stabilize until 25, 30 years after married fatherhood stops its decline. Renewal requires strategic action. Very interesting. So they are saying that the rise of religious nuns, not in the Catholic sense of the word nun, N-U-N, but in the N-O-E-N-E sense. So like people who don't claim to follow or have any religion, they're making the claim that that is due directly to the fact that fathers are not raising their children in a religion, that children are not being given a religion by their parents. They're not being taught a religion. They're not being taught religious arguments, religious principles, religious foundations while they're young by their father, and therefore they are identifying as having none when they get older. At least that's what they're insinuating here, or at least part of it. Moving on, it says churches must boldly reestablish healthy norms for cornerstone marriage while discouraging capstone marriage. Delays in marriage through the novel capstone path lead to increases in those who will never marry and ultimately grows the loneliness epidemic. 100% agree with that last paragraph. Basically, in layman's terms, what that means is if you start presenting marriage as the beginning point of a young person's life, the route that God has designed them to walk in all likelihood, because most people do not have the gift of singleness like Paul, then that is going to decrease the loneliness epidemic that we are seeing. And if you try to present marriage as an option rather than a norm, in my opinion, that is going to increase the loneliness epidemic that we are seeing here today. And just in case you actually are not buying my claim that people are more lonely when they are single, I'm going to pull up a source for you. It's actually the Communio study that we are talking about today. But they have a graph in here that's really cool about loneliness of both church-going and non-church-going men and women, married and unmarried. I think they might even throw cohabiting in there. Yeah, here it is. I'll bring it over here and share it with you. This graphic is very, very interesting here, and what it shows you is it's basically showing you the likelihood of you ending up lonely, okay? And let's just read this together. Loneliness between married and cohabiting churchgoers. So right here where my cursor is, you have 15% of married people in the church saying that they are lonely, and you have 50% of never married people saying they are lonely. So that's a huge jump. That's a huge jump, guys. So look at your odds of being lonely going up as you decline the road of marriage. This is a numbers don't lie, in my opinion. This is a measurement of actual people in the church today. If you are never married, only 15% of those people if you are married, only 15% of the married churchgoers today are saying, according to this study, that they are lonely. And 50% of the never married people in the church are saying that they are lonely, which makes total sense if you take Genesis into account. God said it's not good that man should be alone. Let's make a helpmate that is suitable for him. Okay? This is totally common sense scripture. But it's something that we're not telling young people because we have seen poor marriages happen. We have seen people do marriage wrong, and we don't want to be in any way responsible for someone's divorce. And because we feel like we would be responsible if we recommended marriage to them as a life choice, we keep silent and we don't say anything, even though we are like contributing to the fact that they're very likely to end up lonely if they turn down the road of marriage. Okay. And not to mention just loneliness, they're going to miss out on other joys. Like having children in all likelihood. Now, maybe you can always have children outside of wedlock. I know that happens all the time, but I'm just saying the effects that this advice or lack of advice has on a person's life is very severe. And so I just don't understand why we're constantly not advising young people on this. Like the data is clear that you are more likely to be lonely if you choose not to marry. Okay, and those are the churchgoers. Let's look at the loneliness between married people and cohabitors. Okay, so over here in this section, you have loneliness between married people and cohabitors. The blue is the married, the red is the cohabiting people. So ages 18 to 29, 13% of married people are lonely, 24% of cohabitors are lonely. And then here, ages 30 to 39 bracket, you have 17% of married people lonely and 26% of cohabiting people lonely. So it's about 10% higher in each case, despite the fact that these people actually have a romantic partner. So the people in these measurements actually have a romantic partner. The only difference is that it's not a permanent and lasting relationship. or it's not as likely to be, I should say, because these people have not committed with their words and actions that they will be with one another forever. They're just sort of doing it until something either better comes along or they encounter a problem they deem too difficult to solve and decide to throw in the towel. But I do think it's interesting. Another thing I want to point out to you, just comparing these two. So here you have churchgoers. This is never married people and married people. So this the never married, the red includes singles. And then here you have cohabitors and married people. Do you notice the gap is actually shorter in the cohabiting relationship to married relationship than it is in the never married to married when it comes to loneliness? Isn't that shocking? And I'm not saying cohabiting is a good thing. I don't think it is a good thing. I don't think that's a scriptural claim. The Bible does not have good words for fornication, which is, I think, something that usually cohabitors are doing. But what I will say is that at least the cohabitors have a woman or a man present in their life in a romantic sense, and therefore are a little bit less lonely, even if they don't quite meet the married people, if that makes sense. In other words, singleness is kind of one of the worst things that you can do if you want to avoid loneliness. I mean, and if you ask the average single person, they're probably going to list loneliness as pretty high up there as far as their life problems go. Um, and I don't know. I think when you're lonely, you also make yourself vulnerable to seriously unhealthy sexual coping mechanisms like pornography addiction, like fornication, developing unhealthy sexual long-term mating or short-term mating strategies outside of marriage, just very unhealthy things because you're lonely and you actually have a need for the opposite sex and you're running to these other things to satisfy it instead of running to what God's designed to satisfy it. But I just wanted you to highlight that, like, you're actually more likely, according to this chart, what this chart is telling me is that you're actually more likely to be lonely as a single person than you are to be lonely as a cohabiting person. And you're really, really, really unlikely to be lonely if you're married. In fact, you're the least likely to be lonely out of the three living states: singleness, cohabitation, and marriage, if you're married. Okay. And so I think that's just very relevant information that people need to know because they're making life decisions based on they should be making them based on the data and based on wisdom. Okay. And I'm trying to lay it out very clearly for you and kind of make the case why I think it's a good idea to get married. Yeah. And they have a chart here for married women and cohabiting women as well. You can look that the women under 30, 16% of the married women say they're lonely. 29% of the cohabiting women say they're lonely. So there's actually a huge jump there. There's like 13% jump there for the women. It's even higher than the general one. And then here you have ages 30 to 39. 29% of the married women say they're lonely, which is very sad. And I would say 100% of that group is doing marriage wrong, because I do think that a good marriage is the solution to loneliness. I'm not saying every marriage is the solution to loneliness. We all know and can think of and list, and people pop into our mind when we think of marriages that don't solve the loneliness problem and where the couples are not very connected and don't have a good relationship. But you're more likely to have those problems if you're cohabiting, as you can see by this chart. Yeah, and I would say, and here's another thing I would say too, though, like, sure, not every marriage is going to be happy. Not every marriage is going to, have a lot of fulfillment in it as far as these numbers go. But what I will say is that you're less likely to have problems with loneliness if you're married than cohabiting or singleness. And you're also 100% of the people who are experiencing loneliness within their marriage do not have a good marriage. I think that a good marriage has a 100% success rate according to God's design at fixing the loneliness problem we have. And so, yeah, I thought that was super interesting. Let's go back to our article, though. That was just a little study I wanted to show you. Let's see here. We can move on to the next page. This is key 3 out of 10. Churches must address the gender gap in the pews between men and women. And what I think it's referring to here is, I'm pretty sure we have a lot more women in church attendance than we do men in church attendance today. And this is, of course, not including house church. I don't think that this study took into consideration house churches, which I'm a part of. But point 4 is that more married women in the church struggle in their marriage than married men. So basically, women are having a harder time in marriage than men, what also needs to be addressed. And a lot of men, are using verses like "wives, submit to your husbands" as an excuse to sort of let their selfish nature drive while saying that it's God's direction. And I think that is what's causing a lot of the I think that's what's causing a lot of the negative experiences that women are experiencing and complaining about within marriage today. And those men are not taking into consideration other verses like wives or like husbands, lay down your life for your wife, give yourself up for her, lay down your life for her like Christ laid his life down for the church. Basically saying, telling husbands to die for their wives. We leave that out, and I would say that not we. I shouldn't use an inclusive term there. Bad husbands talk about the verses in the Bible that talk about submissiveness being a good quality, and encourage wives to lay their lives down for their husbands and submit to their husbands, but they don't talk about the verses where men are commanded to do the same. We are told to submit to one another in Paul's epistles, and that is an all-inclusive command to both men and women. And we are also told uniquely as men to lay our lives down for our wives and give ourselves up for her and treat her as Christ treated the church. Okay, so that is a very explicit command to be selfless, not worry about what you want, but instead to take care of your wife and do what is good for her in all situations. Moving on, key 5, they say on average, married people are more satisfied, in their relationships and less lonely than anyone else in church. About 4 in 10 cohabiting women struggle in their relationship, nearly double the number of cohabiting men or married women who struggle. This is just further emphasizing the point that cohabitation and marriage are not created equal, and that there is a clear winner as far as the numbers go in what produces better life results. And so I don't want anybody to be I'm not trying to be dogmatic, and I'm not trying to pull out the speck from my brother's eye without examining the plank at my own, but I do want to be truthful with you here and not deceive you and not tell you lies. I want to tell no lies and make sure I'm telling the truth. And the truth is that marriage is more likely to lead to the better life than cohabitation, and is less likely to produce loneliness than cohabitation. And that is undisputed as far as the data goes. I have not been able to find any data suggesting otherwise. This is kind of a unanimous consensus by both, Christian and secular scholarship. And so I do want you guys to be aware. I'm not trying to be judgmental to people who are cohabiting. That's not my motive. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to make you well informed as a young person about what is most likely to produce the best fruit in your life, because I think the numbers and the research are clear. Key number 6, loneliness is an epidemic in the church among the unmarried, correlating to severe negative health and wellness outcomes. Nearly 2/3 of the never married in their 30s are considered lonely, a higher percentage than what is found among widows. So basically, the never married are more likely to be lonely than widows. Crazy, guys. So it's not just what's the word? That is odd to me. I find that very odd, because in both situations you have either a man or woman living without their partner. Okay, a very sad thing. And you would imagine loneliness would be just as high, but this article is making the claim that you're more likely to be married as a single person, an unmarried person, I should say, than a widow, which is very interesting. Key 7, they say the need is greater outside of the church, so churches have an opportunity and responsibility to evangelize through the felt need of relationship health. There's an article that I read by David Brooks a long time ago. Actually, I read it on this podcast for you. I should probably go back and reread it again today because it's such a good article. It's called The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake, and in that article, I don't even think it was in that article. I can't remember what article it was for, but David Brooks has a quote where he says, never married men are less likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, less likely to die early in life than their unmarried counterparts. And so I just want you guys to be aware that there are also effects on your health. I know you're also, according to a Harvard Health study that I read one time, more likely to survive major operations than the unmarried people are. And I would assume, just by assumption, that the reason is that you have somebody to live for and you're not just living for yourself. And so it's not as easy for you to give up in difficult times on your body. Moving on, point 8, key 8. This article makes the claim that a full circle approach to relationship ministry benefits both single and married people. Cross generational fellowship that includes building community between singles and married people is clearly needed. And I do also know that most churches are not investing in marriage ministry. Their funds are going to other things. When I think a better strategy, if you want to see people resuming church attendance, like we're always talking about church attendance. Okay. Now, I do house church, so I have unique perspective on this, but let's just set that aside for a minute. If we want to boost church attendance, if we want to get people back in church, then the way to do that is clearly through the family. You're not gonna win by speaking more. You're not going to win by yelling more. You're not going to win by trying to present church as a good thing more. You're going to win by producing families that multiply and disciple their children according to your values. That's how you win. Okay, so if you are not investing in marriage ministry and you're not encouraging the majority of young believers to marry, why are we expecting the church pews to fill back up? Because discipleship happens through the family. That's the primary way, in my opinion, that discipleship happens. It's the best way. It's the easiest outlet through which discipleship can occur. So if you're not encouraging young people to get married and start a family and disciple their children and raise them according to the teachings of Jesus, then why are we expecting our church pews to just miraculously fill up? It's like we're living in the past, and every pastor thinks he's as good as George Whitefield. He thinks that because of his profound rhetoric, that the people will just flock to his assembly to hear his amazing oration that is like incredible. That's what it seems to me like we're thinking today. It's like that's not how you fill up a church. You don't fill up a church by impressing people with rhetoric. You don't fill up a church by telling them the truth, even through an emotional display. That's not how, and that's what I see a lot of pastors doing. You fill up a church by encouraging young people to disciple their children and actually have young children to disciple and actually get married so that they can raise those young children in the healthiest way possible. Like we're playing the short game. It's kind of, to me, like this is what the church is doing. Here's what we're doing. We are, instead of playing the slow game of encouraging young people to get married and start families, which is what the scriptural vision is, instead of doing that, that takes too long to get people in the pews. So what I think churches are doing nowadays is they're trying to like pull people off the street. They're trying to like pull from the world, and they're trying to pull from, the large pools of unbelievers surrounding our geographical area, and put those people in the church on Sunday mornings. It's like, what? That is not a productive way. That is not the most efficient way to do this. The most efficient way to experience church growth, and as far as numbers go, is going to be the long game of encouraging young people to actually disciple their children in the ways of Jesus. Okay, but I think the reason we're not doing that is because A, it takes longer, and B, again, a lot of people have trauma with marriage. A lot of people have a bad experience with marriage, and therefore pastors are slow to recommend marriage as a life choice because they don't want to be responsible for someone's divorce or potential divorce. Okay. And we are really dropping the ball on this. Again, looking at Paul's words, looking at Jesus's words, looking at God the Father's words, we are clearly missing something about how important marriage is for long-term growth of the church, okay? Key 9 says the Christian elite must publicly support what they already practice in their personal lives and seek to shift the secular elite on this issue. The secular world does not have a high opinion of marriage either. The church far too often has a low opinion of marriage because of their poor experience with it due to the faulty way they approached it and experienced, therefore, bad fruit from it. But the problem is not with marriage, it's with how you approached marriage. And secular culture's having the same problem. They don't have a great opinion of marriage either. Again, with reference to that previous point I made earlier, less than half of the adult population in this country today is married. And, in 1960, 80% of the population of this country was married. And so that's not a religiously, that's not a religious problem. It doesn't matter whether you're religious or secular. That's an inclusive number. That includes both religious and secular people. And so both the church and the secular culture do not have as good an opinion of marriage as they should, clearly because they're not choosing to do it. Okay? So yeah, that's 100% true. We do need to also present, and what's a practical way we can present marriage as the beautiful thing that it is? Okay, let your marriage shine before men. to use the biblical analogy. Again, I'm not even quoting scripture there. I'm just using scriptural principles to illustrate my point here. Let your if you have a good marriage, don't hide it under a bushel. That's kind of the point I'm making. Like, if you have a good marriage, let people see it. Let people see the fruit of it, because people are watching you and they're making decisions based on how they see, you know, based on the fruit they're seeing come from your decisions. Okay. People are making decisions based on the fruit of your life. They really are. People are watching, especially young people, guys. Young people are not stupid. They are watching to see the fruit of the decisions that are made around them. And if you have bad fruit, you can bet folding money those young people will avoid making the decisions that you have. And if you have good fruit, you can bet folding money that they will make the decisions that you have, because they're not stupid. I don't think young people are stupid. After working with children for 4 years and working with thousands of them, maybe literally thousands, I can safely tell you that kids, even young kids, elementary age kids, are not stupid. They are watching your actions and they are observing the fruit of the different choices that are made by different adults in their lives, and they're making decisions about what choices they are going to make based on those people that they see and that fruit that they see. Jesus says you will know a tree by its fruit, and it's common sense, and kids know it. Okay? They are deciding how to live their lives based on the fruit that they see in yours and the other adults in their life. Okay? Point 10, key 10. This is the last key, and then I will close off this podcast episode. It says pastors and church leaders must become serious and effective in both increasing the number of Christ-centered marriages and the health of those marriages. Yes, so this is basically talking about church ministry needs to be more focused on marriage health, which it is not right now. If you look at that Communio study that I showed you earlier, I'm not going to take the time to pull it back up for you, but I'm pretty sure somewhere in that study, they go through the number of churches that are actually investing in their marriage ministries, and they tell you what percent of the revenue that church is generating is going towards marriage ministry, and it is not much. Most of our money that we get, that churches get through tithes and offerings, is not going to marriage ministry. Very little of it is. And I'm not saying that other things are not important. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that if we need to put our money where our mouth is, and if we understand that marriage and family is the way that we are going to disciple future generations, then we need to stop trying to pull other people's children off the streets and start teaching children of our own. Okay. And if you want to do that, and you got to make sure the marriages in your church aren't falling apart, which too many of them are. Okay. Because of the poor decisions that are being made in those marriages. So maybe work on getting those in order. Let's get our own house in order before we start trying to pull people off the streets. That's what I think. I think that would solve a lot of the church's problems. Again, all this is just my opinion. If you disagree, please feel free to let me know in the YouTube comments or anywhere. I don't care where. You can private message the show on Instagram or Facebook. It doesn't matter. Would love to hear from you again. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, it would make me feel super connected to you guys. But I'm really passionate about this issue, and I think that this Communio study did hit quite a few nails on the head as far as the key takeaways that the church needs to understand about how to get the future generations impacted and fix the marriages that we have today, and fix the loneliness epidemic that is sweeping the young people of the church, the unmarried young people of the church, okay? Because as you can see in those numbers I showed you earlier, there is a clear target for loneliness. And loneliness is a solution that the Bible has a cure for. Psalm 68 says that God sets the lonely in families. That is God's solution for loneliness. I say that all the time, but it's true, okay? And so I would just encourage you guys to let your marriage shine, okay? If you have a great marriage, let people see the fruit of it. Don't hide it, okay? Make it a public thing, which is what I try to do with Lainey all the time, because I love my wife. I love our decision to get married. I would be miserable in any other living situation. I would be lonely in any other living situation. I would be experiencing terrible fruit in any other situation, because it's not what God's made me for. Again, I don't get to decide the rules of how the world works. I get to decide whether or not I follow the rules that God has set in place. That's all you've got to decide, man. Gandalf has that great quote in Lord of the Rings where he says, "We don't get to decide what to do with the time, or what to." Let's see. So does all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. You don't get to decide what leads to the hard life and what leads to the good life. You just get to decide what to do with the time that you've been given, okay? And then, after that, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You've done your part. You have done your part, and let you do your best, let God do the rest. Do everything as unto the Lord, and then the rest is not your problem. That's Colossians, okay? Gandalf has another quote where he says, and I'll probably butcher this, but he says, "Is not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, so that those to uproot the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they should have is not ours to rule. And I think that's a great Tolkien quote number 2 to close this episode out on. Just do your part with your marriage. Present the case, let people see the good fruit of your marriage, and then let God do the rest. Okay, kids are watching. So thank you so much for listening today. God bless you guys, and I will talk to you guys next time.